My husband's closest friend stepped out of our bathroom, clutching abortion pills, and said, "I thought you too were trying for a baby." I glanced up from my laptop, where I'd been searching IVF clinics. "We are trying, Zayn." "What do you mean?" Next to me, my husband, Jasper, froze mid-reach for his coffee. Zayn raised an orange prescription bottle. "Then why do you have meipra? This is abortion medication. It ends pregnancies." I laughed shakily. "That isn't mine." Can you imagine looking at the man you love, the man you build a life with, and realizing he's been poisoning you, slowly, deliberately for months? And then the twist, the truly gut-wrenching, soul-crushing part. He'd been killing your babies, one by one, for money. What the hell do you even do after that? It all came crashing down one ordinary afternoon. Zayn, a friend who was helping us around the house, picked up this little prescription bottle. He looked at it, then at me, then at Jasper. I would never, Jasper. "Is this yours?" The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. Zayn, bless his heart, started reading the label, and I could see the puzzle pieces clicking into place for him. I said, my voice barely a whisper, "There's only 2 people who live here." And then he saw it, filled last month and the month before. My stomach didn't just drop, it plummeted. Then came the words that changed everything. My miscarriages. I'd had 4 miscarriages in 23 months. 4. And suddenly it wasn't a cruel twist of fate. It was intentional. My legs felt like jelly, but I pushed myself up. I remember thinking, "You've been poisoning me? You've been killing our babies?" Jasper backed away, hitting the counter. His face was gray, drained of all color. He stammered, "It's not what you think." But I wasn't having it. "Then explain," I demanded, my voice starting to rise, "why Iberian medication is in our house while I'm taking fertility supplements, while I inject myself with hormones, while I've been blaming my body for failing us." The words ripped out of me, raw and broken. "You called our children. You just let your mother call me defective at Thanksgiving. Asked if maybe we should explore other options. Your sister announced her 3rd pregnancy at Christmas, and everyone looked at me with pity." My voice was screaming now, not just rising. I refused my promotion to reduce stress. I gave up coffee, wine, sushi, even my anxiety medication, all to increase the odds. Jasper opened his mouth, trying to interject. "The doctor said stress could. Don't you dare." I cut him off, my voice a whip. "Don't you dare quote the doctors to me." Zayn stood there, frozen, a horrified statue. I did 3 rounds of Clomid that made me so sick I couldn't work. They shot dye through my fallopian tubes. Do you know how much that hurts, Jasper? While you were poisoning me, I was letting doctors torture me to find out why I couldn't stay pregnant. Tears were streaming down my face now. "We named our babies," I continued, each name a dagger. "You remember how we picked them out together? Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, Xavier. I was knitting their baby blankets, while you were making sure they'd never need them." Jasper's hands were trembling, reaching out, as if he was the one who needed comfort. That's when Zayn's face went even whiter. "Jasper, is this about Sloane?" Jasper flinched. He went utterly white. "Who's Sloane?" I asked, confused, my pain briefly forgotten. "She's nobody, just someone from work," he mumbled. "Nobody." Zayn cut in, his own anger now simmering. "I saw you leaving work together late last month. You looked like you were flirting. Her hand was on your neck." Jasper's face visibly started to shake. "When I asked you about it, you said it was a work project. I believed you because I didn't take my best friend for a cheater." Zayn's voice was laced with disgust, but the way you're shaking makes me doubt that. In a surge of pure adrenaline, I grabbed Jasper's phone from the counter. "You said she's nobody, so you won't mind me looking." The texts with Sloane loaded instantly. Hearts, kiss emojis. "Can't wait until you're finally free." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely scroll. Then I saw it. "Did the insurance pay out yet?" My blood didn't just go cold, it froze. Insurance. I kept reading. $8,000 this time. Same as the last three. Perfect. Almost enough for the lawyer and apartment deposit. One more should do it. She wants to try again next month. My voice broke as I read the next one aloud, making her dead babies pay for our future. Jasper's knees buckled. He gripped the counter, fighting to stay standing, not from pain, but from sheer embarrassment from being caught. You've been collecting money from our dead children. I could barely breathe. Pregnancy loss insurance. Through your work. I didn't even know that existed. $8,000 per miscarriage. $32,000. It kept getting worse. I kept scrolling, finding something more sickening with every swipe. You texted her from the hospital. While I was miscarrying Indigo, you wrote, one more after this and we're free. He held my hand through contractions while planning the next murder. I never meant for it to hurt you like, Jasper started, finally finding his voice, a pathetic whine. You didn't mean to hurt me? I screamed. The pregnancy tests. Everything clicked into place, a horrifying, crystal-clear picture. You always brought them home, insisted on watching me take them. You knew exactly when I was pregnant, so you could start poisoning me. You controlled the timeline of when each baby would die, so it would never look suspicious. I hurled his phone at him. You let me believe I was broken. Let your mother suggest you deserved a real woman who could give you children. You even agreed with her, then said you'd love me anyway, like you were doing me a favor. Zayn already had his phone out. I'm calling the police. Jasper lunged for me. Please let me explain. Explain what? I yelled, backing away. How you collected money for our babies. How you poisoned me to afford your girlfriend. I used our savings for fertility treatments while you were collecting death benefits. I looked at this man I'd loved for 7 years. Every night I prayed for a baby. Every morning I gave myself injections that made me gain 30 pounds. His response? You said I was less attractive, remember? All while he was poisoning me to be with Sloane. Jasper's mouth moved, but no words came out. Like even he couldn't find a lie big enough for this. Zayn was already on the phone with the police, giving our address. Phoenix would have been too now, I said quietly, the rage now a cold, hollow ache. Sage would be walking. Indigo would be 3 months old. But to you, they were just transactions. $8,000 each. Sirens in the distance. Jasper stood there, frozen, unable to speak. I wanted to be a mother, I whispered, looking at him, truly seeing him for the first time. And you knew that. You watched me destroy myself trying. The sirens grew louder. They're coming for you, I said, a chilling condescending. And I hope Sloane was worth it. His eyes darted around, and before I knew it, he was making a run for it out the back door. Zayn just held me while I cried, finally letting myself fall apart. The front door exploded open, and 3 officers rushed in, hands on their weapons. Zayn's arms dropped, and I pointed towards the back door, still swinging on its hinges. 2 officers sprinted through the kitchen and out into the yard, while the 3rd stayed with us. My whole body was shaking so hard I could barely stand. The officer kept asking what happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. I just kept pointing at the prescription bottle on the counter, sobbing. Zayn picked up Jasper's phone from where it had landed and handed it to the officer. The screen was still showing those awful texts about making dead babies pay for their future. The officer's face went from confused to horrified as he scrolled. He pulled out his radio and called for evidence bags and a crime scene team. More sirens. Paramedics. They took one look at me, shaking and crying, and immediately started checking my vitals. My blood pressure was 180/110, my pulse racing at 140. The paramedics said I needed to go to the emergency room right away. She explained that being poisoned repeatedly for almost 2 years could have caused serious damage we couldn't see. Zayn said he'd drive me and helped me stand. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean on him. The officer said detectives would meet us at the hospital for my statement. Outside, for police cars, lights flashing. Neighbors standing on their porches, Mrs. Henderson with her hand over her mouth. Zayn helped me into his car, and we drove to the hospital in silence, broken only by my occasional sobs. At the ER, they took me straight back when Zayn explained about the poisoning. The triage nurse's eyes went wide. They put me in a room, and a doctor came in within minutes. I told her everything about the 4 miscarriages and finding out Jasper had been giving me abortion medication. She ordered blood work, urine tests, liver function tests, and an ultrasound to check for organ damage. A nurse drew what felt like 20 vials of blood. Then another nurse came with a camera to photograph me for evidence. My face, my arms, where all the 4 marks were from the miscarriages, my swollen belly from the fertility drugs. Everything for the police report. I could hear Zayn out in the waiting room on his phone. Later, he told me he was calling in sick, texting our friend group. He kept saying he should have said something when he saw Jasper with Sloane. He looked destroyed by guilt when I saw him between tests. About 2 hours later, Detective Lionel Mallister arrived. Tall, kind eyes, lead investigator. He had a laptop and started typing as I told him everything from the beginning. 2 years trying for a baby. For miscarriages that destroyed me. Fertility treatments that cost our entire savings. Finding the bottle. The insurance money texts. Jasper running. He asked detailed questions about dates, times, medical records. He gave me his card, his direct cell number. They needed my consent to search the house. I signed immediately. He explained they'd collect everything from the kitchen, all medications. They'd already put out an alert for Jasper's car, frozen his credit cards and bank accounts. He wouldn't get far. After the detective left, a social worker came, an older woman with gentle hands. She explained that reproductive coercion was a recognized form of domestic abuse. She gave me pamphlets about emergency protective orders and victim resources. What Jasper did, she said, was attempted murder, fraud, and domestic violence all rolled into one. She helped me fill out paperwork for an emergency restraining order right there on the hospital bed. The doctor came back with my test results around 9 o'clock that night. My liver enzymes were elevated from the repeated poisoning. It would take months, she said, to know the full extent of the damage. She prescribed medications for my liver, gave me referrals to specialists. I was lucky, she said. Lucky Zayn found that bottle when he did. Another pregnancy with Jasper poisoning me could have killed me. They discharged me around 10:30 with a stack of papers and follow-up appointments. Zayn drove me to his apartment. The police said our house was a crime scene. I couldn't go back for at least 48 hours. His apartment was small but clean. He set me up in his guest room, made chamomile tea, and sat with me while I stared at the wall. Everything felt surreal, like this was happening to someone else. My phone kept buzzing with calls and texts from people who'd heard, but I couldn't deal with any of it. At midnight, I called my boss. I just said there was a family emergency, and I needed time off. She told me to take whatever time I needed and that HR would send paperwork for family medical leave. I hung up and just sat there, on Zayn's couch, staring at nothing until I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m. When I woke up a few hours later, my first thought was that maybe it had all been some horrible nightmare. But then I saw the white hospital bracelet still on my wrist. The reality hit me all over again, and I barely made it to Zayn's bathroom before I started throwing up. I stayed there on the cold tile floor for almost an hour, just dry heaving and crying until there was nothing left. Zayn knocked softly and brought me water and a wet washcloth. But I couldn't even look at him, so embarrassed at falling apart like this. My phone started ringing around 9 o'clock. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The detective's voice was calm. They'd found the prescription bottle and tracked down records. Jasper had been getting refills from 3 different pharmacies, using different doctors. The insurance company had already opened their own investigation into the fraud and would probably want to talk to me soon. After I hung up, I remembered I had a fertility appointment. When I started explaining why I couldn't come in, the nurse got really quiet and transferred me to someone else. The next person was from their legal department. They were flagging my file. They'd provide all my medical records to support the criminal case and asked if I had a lawyer yet. I hadn't even thought about needing a lawyer. Around noon, my phone rang again. Alicia Mead from my employer's insurance department. Her voice was professional, but I could hear the shock underneath. She needed a recorded statement about the pregnancy loss claims. I spent 40 minutes going through each miscarriage, when it happened, how much money had been paid out, while she typed everything. She kept saying, "I'm so sorry, this is unbelievable." After that call, I opened my laptop. I needed to see the proof for myself. The deposits were right there, plain as day. $8,000 appearing in our joint account after each miscarriage, then immediately transferred to another account only in Jasper's name. The dates matched perfectly. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself and the detective. My phone rang again. Jasper's mother. I almost didn't answer, but then decided to see what she had to say. She didn't even wait for me to say hello before screaming about how I was ruining her son's life with my lies and hysteria. How dare I involve the police in a private family matter? She said I'd always been unstable, and this proved it. That Jasper was better off without me. I hung up, but not before recording the whole thing on Zayn's phone. I forwarded the recording to the detective, then blocked her number, her husband's, and Jasper's sisters. I knew they'd all be calling next. 3 days passed in a blur of police interviews, calls with lawyers and insurance investigators. Then an email popped up from Jasper. He was writing to say this was all a huge misunderstanding, begging me to call off the police. He actually had the nerve to claim the medication was to help manage my miscarriages, not cause them. Like I was stupid enough to believe that. He said he'd been trying to spare me more pain by ending the pregnancies early when he could tell they weren't viable. Reading his lies made me so sick I had to run to the bathroom again. The next day, I had an appointment with a reproductive specialist the detective recommended. She went through my whole medical history, explaining how repeated exposure to meipra could have caused serious damage to my uterus and cervix. She ordered more specialized tests and blood work, warning me that my future fertility might be permanently affected. She'd seen cases like this before, she said, but never where it was deliberate poisoning by a spouse. While I was there, Zayn was at the police station, giving his formal statement about seeing Jasper with Sloane. He showed them photos from when he'd seen them at a restaurant. In one, Sloane's hand was on Jasper's neck. They were clearly too close for just coworkers. He also told them how Jasper had lied. The detective called me that afternoon with an update that made everything even worse. The forensics team had tested our coffee maker and found meipra residue in the water reservoir and filter. They'd also tested the vitamin supplements Jasper had been giving me for stress and found the pills had been opened and resealed with the medication mixed in. This proved it wasn't isolated incidents, but deliberate poisoning over an extended period of time. 3 days later, I was sitting in a waiting room that smelled like vanilla candles and old magazines. My hands wrapped around a paper cup of water that kept shaking. The therapist's door opened, and a woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun called my name. Elise Meredith had an office full of plants and soft chairs. She listened while I told her everything, from the prescription bottle to the coffee maker. When I finished, she leaned forward and said the words I needed to hear. She called it attempted murder, not just betrayal. We spent the rest of the hour making a safety plan, changing my locks, getting a new phone number. My hands finally stopped shaking when she wrote down the crisis hotline number and made me promise to call if I felt unsafe. The next morning, the detective called and asked me to come to the station. They'd pulled our home security footage from the cloud backup I'd forgotten we even had. The timestamp showed Jasper coming home with pharmacy bags on January 15th, March 3rd, May 20th, and July 8th. Each date was exactly 2 days before I lost a baby. The worst part was watching him on the kitchen camera, adding white powder to my morning smoothie while I was still in bed. He'd stir it carefully, wash the spoon, then bring it to me with a kiss on my forehead. The detective had to pause the video when I started throwing up in their trash can. They gave me ginger ale and crackers, explaining they'd found more evidence on Jasper's devices. He'd been using encrypted messaging apps with Sloan, trying to delete everything after I confronted him. Their tech team was working on recovery, but said it might take weeks. The detective wrote down every detail in his notebook while I sat there, feeling like my whole life was evidence now. I started looking for apartments that same week. I couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Every showing felt wrong. The first place was too expensive. The second one faced a playground where kids were always screaming. The third had a kitchen exactly like ours, and I had to leave. I finally found a 1-bedroom above a bakery that smelled like bread every morning. The landlord didn't ask questions. 2 weeks after that, the district attorney's office called. Vincent Milligan had a voice like gravel. He explained they were building 2 cases, one for poisoning, one for insurance fraud. He said the evidence was strong, but warned me the process would take months, maybe longer. They'd need me to testify, to relive everything in front of strangers who would judge whether my pain was real enough for justice. He gave me a victim advocate's number. We both knew what I needed was impossible to get back. The divorce papers arrived the next day. Jasper's lawyer claimed I was having a mental breakdown, making false accusations. What makes someone document their own crime so carefully? The security footage showing Jasper mixing powder into smoothies while I slept. Did he forget about the cameras, or just think he'd never get caught? They wanted control of our assets, said I was too unstable to make financial decisions. My hands shook with rage as I read his claims that I was delusional, that I'd imagined everything because of grief. He even suggested I needed a psychiatric evaluation. The papers felt heavy, like holding proof that he was still trying to destroy me, even from jail. I hired Cyrus McQueen that afternoon after calling 6 other lawyers who said my case was too complicated. He cost more than I made in 3 months, but promised to fight every single lie. The first thing he did was file for a protective order and freeze our joint accounts before Jasper could empty them. He had me write down everything I remembered. When I finished, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "We are going to bury Jasper in court." Work sent FMLA paperwork the following week. My manager called to check in, her voice careful. She said to take all the time I needed, but we both knew my performance review was coming up. The promotion I'd turned down to reduce stress felt like another thing Jasper stole from me. I filled out the forms at my new kitchen table, writing family medical emergency in the reason box because there wasn't a checkbox for husband murdered my babies. 3 weeks into my new apartment, I ran into Sloan at the grocery store. She was buying pregnancy tests. The irony made me want to scream, but instead I pulled out my phone and started recording. She walked right up to me, had the nerve to touch my arm, and say she had no idea what Jasper was doing. Her voice was high and fake sweet as she insisted they were together, but she thought I knew about the affair. She said Jasper told her we had an arrangement, that our marriage was just for show. She kept talking while I recorded. Admitted they'd been together for 8 months. Said he promised to leave me after the holidays. When she finally noticed my phone, her face went white, and she practically ran to her car. The blood test results came back the next day. The doctor called to explain they'd found traces of meipra stone metabolites still in my system 5 weeks after the last poisoning. It proved repeated exposure over time. My body had been saturated with the drug. The documentation would be crucial for the criminal case, she said, then asked if I needed a referral for counseling. I almost laughed because I was already seeing Elise twice a week, and it still wasn't enough to make sense of any of this. 2 weeks passed in a blur of police interviews and medical tests before I got the call. The detective's voice was flat when he told me they'd pulled Jasper over for a broken taillight 3 states away. He'd been living in his car, hadn't shaved in days, and started crying when they cuffed him. The booking photo they sent me showed someone I barely recognized. His eyes were hollow, his clothes wrinkled and stained. I stared at that photo for an hour, waiting to feel something besides empty. Zayn kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer because I didn't know. The bail hearing happened 3 days later in a courtroom that smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. Jasper's mother sat in the front row, wearing her church dress, shooting daggers at me. When the judge set bail at $200,000, she stood up and wrote a check without hesitation. She'd refinanced her house, the bailiff told me later. The judge granted my request for a restraining order, but I knew that piece of paper wouldn't stop Jasper if he really wanted to hurt me. His mother cornered me in the hallway, hissed that I was destroying her son's life over nothing. I walked away without responding, because what could I say to a woman who thought poisoning babies was nothing? The next week, Elise suggested I try a pregnancy loss support group. I sat in that circle of elastic chairs for 20 minutes before I could speak. When I finally said the words out loud about what Jasper did, the room went completely silent. One woman started crying, and another reached over to hold my hand. They believed me without question, which was more than I could say for most people. After the meeting, 3 of them gave me their phone numbers and said to call anytime. I saved them, but couldn't bring myself to reach out yet. The detective called while I was grocery shopping 4 days later. They'd gotten Sloane's phone records and found hundreds of texts between her and Jasper about the insurance money. She'd known everything from the beginning and helped him plan each poisoning. The prosecutor had offered her a deal to testify against him, and she'd taken it immediately. No loyalty among murderers, apparently. I had to abandon my cart in the cereal aisle and sit in my car for an hour after that call. The next morning, I stopped at my usual coffee shop for the first time since everything happened. A pregnant woman was ordering at the counter, her hand resting on her round belly. My chest got tight. I couldn't breathe. The walls started closing in. My vision went dark around the edges. I stumbled to my car and used the breathing exercises Elise taught me. Count to 4, breathing in, hold for 4, out for 4. It took 15 minutes before I could drive home. My lawyer, Vincent, called that afternoon with news that made me want to scream. Jasper was claiming the meipra stone was prescribed by a doctor for his own medical condition, some rare thing where men supposedly need it, which was complete garbage. We spent the next 6 hours going through every medical record I had. Not a single prescription for that drug existed in my files. Vincent said we'd need to subpoena Jasper's medical records to prove he was lying. The insurance company called the next day. Alicia's voice was all business. They were denying all 4 claims Jasper had filed and demanding repayment of $32,000 plus interest. They were also filing criminal charges for insurance fraud. She said they took fraud very seriously and would pursue this to the fullest extent. Good, I thought. Let him face consequences from every direction. Zayn drove me back to the house a week later to pack my things. I'd been staying with him since that first night and couldn't put off getting my stuff any longer. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, my whole body started shaking. This was where he'd poison me every morning, mixing that drug into my prenatal smoothies while kissing my forehead. I threw up in the sink while Zayn rubbed my back. We grabbed clothes and important papers and left everything else behind. I couldn't stand being in those rooms where I'd been so happy and so stupid. My phone started blowing up with messages that night from people I thought were friends. Jasper had been posting on social media about how I was having a mental breakdown and making up horrible lies. Some people believed him and sent me messages saying I needed help. Others just wanted gossip. Asking for details like this was entertainment. I deleted every social media account I had after reading one post that said I was obviously lying because what husband would do something so evil? The prosecutor brought in a forensic toxicologist the following week. She spent 3 hours explaining how the poisoning pattern showed careful planning. Each dose was calculated to end the pregnancy while keeping me alive, which required specific medical knowledge. The spacing between poisonings was designed to look like natural miscarriages. Whoever did this, she said, knew exactly what they were doing and how to make it look like bad luck. The prosecutor recorded everything for the trial. 2 weeks later, I was shoving boxes into the back of Zayn's truck while rain soaked through my jacket. The apartment I found was across town in a building that smelled like old carpet and had water stains on the ceiling. Zayn carried my couch up 3 flights of stairs without complaining, even though I could see his face turning red. We worked in silence, mostly because every time he tried to talk, his voice would crack and he'd look away. When we got the bed frame assembled, he sat on the floor and stared at his hands. He kept opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Finally, he managed to tell me he should have said something when he saw Jasper with Sloane. I told him it wasn't his fault, but he shook his head and said he'd been a coward. After that, we set up some rules about how often he could check on me because his guilt was making him text me every hour. The next morning, Vincent called to say Jasper's lawyer wanted to meet about a plea deal. I drove to Vincent's office, walls covered in law degrees, and pictures of him shaking hands with important-looking people. Jasper's lawyer sat across from us with a folder full of papers and started talking about reduced charges if I agreed not to sue for damages. Vincent listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and told the lawyer the evidence was too strong for us to consider any deals. The lawyer kept pushing and said Jasper would plead to simple assault instead of poisoning. Vincent actually laughed and said the grand jury would never accept that. 3 days after that meeting, I had to go to the divorce mediation in a conference room that overlooked the city. Jasper sat at the other end of the table, looking thinner than before, with dark circles under his eyes. His lawyer started reading from prepared notes about how the marriage assets should be divided. Then Jasper's lawyer said, "Since I made more money than Jasper, I should pay him support." My lawyer, Cyrus, stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Now that's a lawyer who knows when to show real anger. How does someone even suggest the victim should pay their poisoner? He pulled out tax returns showing I'd only made more money the last 2 years, while Jasper had been the higher earner for 5 years before that. Cyrus also pointed out that Jasper had been stealing from me through insurance fraud, so any claim for support was ridiculous. Jasper's lawyer tried to argue, but Cyrus shut him down with case law and precedents until they dropped the support request. The following Monday, I went back to work, but only for half days. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept making mistakes on reports I'd done hundreds of times. My supervisor found me crying in the bathroom after I sent an email to the wrong client list. She told me to take my time, that everyone understood, but I knew my career was basically over. My hands would shake when I typed, and I'd forget what I was doing. A week later, Vincent called. Sloane had taken a deal with the prosecution. She gave them everything. Texts where Jasper called the babies financial opportunities and calculated how much money each one would bring. She showed the messages where he planned exactly when to give me the medicine based on my cycle. There were emails where they discussed apartment listings and how they'd used the insurance money for deposits and furniture. Sloane even had recordings of phone calls where Jasper laughed about how I blamed myself for the miscarriages. Vincent said her testimony was devastating and would basically guarantee a conviction. The worst day came when I had to go to the prosecutor's office to identify evidence. They brought out clear plastic bags with the baby blankets I'd been knitting. The yellow one for Phoenix still had the needles in it where I'd stopped mid-row. The green one for Sage was almost finished, except for the border. The purple one for Indigo was just started, only a few inches done. The blue one for Xavier was complete. I remembered wrapping it in tissue paper, thinking maybe this time we'd get to use it. The prosecutor asked me to confirm these were mine, and I could barely speak to say yes. They also had the pregnancy journals I'd kept with notes about symptoms and hopes for each baby. Seeing all of it labeled as evidence with case numbers made me realize those babies were never going to be anything more than evidence in a criminal case. 2 weeks after that, the grand jury met. Vincent called me that afternoon to say they'd indicted Jasper on all charges. He was facing assault with poison, insurance fraud, and domestic violence charges that could mean 20 years in prison. Vincent said it was one of the strongest cases he'd seen because of all the evidence and Sloane's testimony. But he warned me that trials were unpredictable, and Jasper's lawyer would try everything to create doubt. The next week, I had an appointment with my fertility doctor. She ran a bunch of tests to see what damage the medicine had done. Mixed results. Some scarring, but not complete infertility. I might still be able to have children, she said, but recommended waiting at least a year for my body to heal. She also said the emotional trauma needed time to process before I'd be ready to try again. I left her office feeling numb, because I didn't know if I'd ever want to try again. While dealing with all the legal stuff, I started getting mail I didn't recognize. Credit card statements for cards I'd never opened, with balances of thousands of dollars. I called the companies. The cards were in my name, with my social security number. Charges for jewelry, electronics, cash advances, totaling $30,000. I took everything to Cyrus. He filed fraud paperwork, but said it would take months to resolve, and I might have to pay some of it while we fought. He found applications Jasper had forged with my signature and submitted proof to the credit companies. They moved slowly. Yesterday morning, I got to work and found a huge flower arrangement on my desk with a note in Jasper's handwriting begging for forgiveness. Security cameras showed the delivery person, but not who ordered them. I called the police to report the restraining order violation, but they said without proof Jasper ordered them, they could only give him a warning. Security walked me to my car. The flowers went straight in the dumpster, but I could still smell them on my hands, even after washing them 5 times. 6 months crawled by. I found myself in my apartment lighting 4 small candles on what would have been Indigo's first birthday. The vanilla scent filled my living room while I sat on the floor, naming each flame out loud for Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, and Xavier. My hands shook setting up the last candle, but I managed to get through singing Happy Birthday without completely falling apart. The cake sat untouched. For tiny wrapped boxes containing baby socks, I couldn't stop myself from buying. I blew out each candle one by one and whispered their names into the smoke. The divorce papers came through 2 weeks later. My lawyer explained how Jasper's criminal actions meant our prenup kicked in hard. I got the house, both cars, our savings, and the retirement accounts. He got stuck with over $40,000 in legal fees and nothing else. The paperwork showed his signature shaky and uneven, where he'd signed from county jail. I signed my name, steady and clear, then went home and changed the locks, even though he couldn't get out anyway. 3 months after that, I sat in a cold room at the courthouse, waiting to testify before the grand jury. They made me describe each miscarriage in detail, while Jasper sat 20 feet away in his orange jumpsuit, watching me. His lawyer kept interrupting, trying to make me look confused or like I was lying. I pulled out my journal. I'd written everything down. I read the entries word for word. The cramping, the bleeding, the emergency room visits, the DNC procedures. When his lawyer asked if maybe the miscarriages were natural, I pointed at the prescription bottle evidence and asked him to explain why abortion medication was in my prenatal vitamins. The grand jury indicted on all charges within an hour. Elise met me at her office the next week to help write my victim impact statement. She had tissues ready and a recorder so I could speak instead of write when my hands got too shaky. I named each baby and described the nursery I'd started planning 4 different times. I talked about the baby clothes I'd hidden in the closet that I still couldn't bring myself to donate. I mentioned the stretch marks on my stomach that proved those pregnancies were real, even though Jasper tried to erase them. We practiced reading it together until I could get through without my voice breaking completely. The plea deal news came through Vincent's office a month later. 5 years with possible parole in 3. I threw my phone across the room. Vincent explained on speaker that it was actually a good outcome for a poisoning case where the victims technically never drew breath according to the law. I screamed that they were real babies to me and hung up on him. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks after that in a packed courtroom. I read my statement while Jasper's mother wailed dramatically and his sister shot daggers at me. The judge nodded along, said he understood my pain, but had to follow the plea agreement. Jasper stood up and mumbled something about being sorry, but the judge cut him off. I walked out feeling empty, while his family shouted that I'd ruined his life. My lawyer filed the civil suit for emotional distress and battery the same week, warning me it would take years and I'd probably never see a penny from someone doing time. I signed the papers anyway. I wanted it on record forever what he'd done. The insurance company moved faster with their own lawsuit and won $50,000, including penalties and interest, that Jasper would owe whenever he got out. Their lawyer called it a slam-dunk case of insurance fraud and said they'd garnish any wages he ever earned. Small comfort when my arms stayed empty every night. 6 months into a sentence, I started volunteering with a domestic violence group, telling my story to rooms full of women who nodded along with recognition in their eyes. Some had bruises, but others had invisible wounds like mine, from partners who found creative ways to control and hurt them. The coordinator said reproductive coercion was more common than people realized, and my story helped others recognize the signs. One woman came up after, crying, because her husband had been messing with her birth control, and she thought she was going crazy. A full year after that first moment with Zayn holding up the prescription bottle, I sat in Elisa's office for our monthly session. The panic attacks had gone from daily to maybe once a week, usually triggered by baby commercials or pregnancy announcements on social media. I'd gone back to work full-time and even taken the promotion I had turned down before, throwing myself into 12-hour days that kept my mind busy. My coworkers had stopped walking on eggshells, and I could make it through most days without crying in the bathroom. The grocery store baby aisle still made me leave my cart and run for the parking lot sometimes, but Elise said that was normal and might never fully go away. I had started dating again, just coffee meetings that never went anywhere, because I'd eventually have to explain why I flinched when they mentioned wanting kids someday. The grief hadn't gotten smaller, but I'd gotten better at carrying it. Like a heavy backpack, I'd learned to balance. Zayn started coming over on Thursdays to watch basketball games. We'd order Chinese food. He stopped trying to fix everything or apologize every 5 minutes. He'd set up clear rules for himself, like texting before coming over, not staying past 10 o'clock, and not bringing up Jasper unless I did first, which helped us find something that felt almost normal again. The prison called one afternoon while I was sorting through medical bills. Jasper had been attacked by another inmate and was in the infirmary with broken ribs and a fractured jaw. I hung up without asking if he was okay. I went back to sorting papers, waiting to feel something, anything. But there was just this empty space where caring used to live. My boss pulled me aside the next week and offered me a transfer to the marketing department in the East Building where nobody knew my story. I wouldn't have to see the break room where Sloan used to eat lunch or walk past Jasper's old office every day. I packed my desk that Friday and moved everything to a cubicle with a window view of the parking lot instead of the courtyard where we used to eat lunch together. Elise convinced me to meet someone for coffee. Just coffee, she said, with a guy from her book club who knew my situation but wanted to meet anyway. I lasted 20 minutes before making an excuse about a work emergency. His cologne reminded me of the aftershave Jasper wore to our wedding, and I threw up in the restaurant bathroom before driving home. The lawyer called while I was planting tomatoes in my new garden bed. The civil suit settled for $75,000 that I'd probably never see. But at least there was a legal document saying Jasper could never contact me again, even after prison. I bought 4 small trees from the nursery and planted them along the back fence, one for each baby. Writing their names on river rocks, I placed at the base of each trunk. Phoenix got the apple tree because we'd talked about picking apples with our kids someday. Sage got the oak for strength. Indigo got the cherry tree for beauty. And Xavier got the maple because fall was when we'd tried the hardest for him. I watered them every morning, pulled weeds on weekends, and sometimes sat on the grass between them, reading pregnancy lost books Elise brought me. A reporter from the state paper left 3 voicemails about doing a feature story on reproductive coercion and insurance fraud, but I deleted them. I didn't want to be the cautionary tale in someone's Sunday morning coffee reading. The anniversary came on a Tuesday. I took a day off work to sit in my garden with the trees that were starting to show new growth, and realized I'd survived something that should have destroyed me completely. I wasn't grateful for finding strength I never wanted to need, and I wasn't proud of surviving something that never should have happened. But I was still here, still breathing, still getting up each morning to water 4 trees and go to work, and sometimes even laugh at Zayn's terrible jokes during basketball games. The poison Jasper fed me for 2 years hadn't killed me, even though it killed our babies. And some days that felt like its own kind of victory, even if it was one I never wanted to win. So, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had your entire world shattered by a betrayal you never saw coming? Share your thoughts below. I'd really love to hear from you.